Hello and welcome to another episode of the Oracle's Classroom. In this episode, I'm going to be answering a question from Felix on one of my beginner series on the Hershey Company, using the Hershey Company to illustrate basic financial statements. Felix's question is a very good one, and so I've got it up here on the screen. So he says, all right, that's great that you use return on invested capital to see how well a business is doing, but how do you go about actually calculating that? Very good question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a little clip from Warren Buffett. He gave an interview with CNBC in 2019. I'm going to roll that, and then we'll follow up. We'll go to the financial statements of Kraft Heinz and use that to show exactly how Warren Buffett looks at this. Before we jump in, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell. Would really appreciate your help in growing this channel. So without further ado, here's Warren.
Interesting thing about Kraft Heinz is it's still a wonderful business in that it uses about $7 billion of tangible assets and earns $6 billion pre-tax on that. So on the assets required to run the business, $7 billion, they earn $6 billion roughly after depreciation pre-tax. But we and certain predecessors, but primarily we paid $100 billion more than the tangible assets. So for us, it has to earn on $107 billion, not just on the $7 billion that the business employs. And we don't have a way. It'd be wonderful if we had a way to deploy another $7 billion and earn $6 billion, but it isn't there.
All right, so let's dig into these numbers. So I'm going to post a link in the description to this the financial statements here. This comes from the 2017 Kraft Heinz 10K filing. I've just chosen 2017. I think it's cleaner. It shows that what we're going to use is the 2016 column. Kraft purchased Heinz, or Heinz Kraft purchased Kraft rather, in mid-2015. So I believe Buffett was he had these 2016 figures in mind. So let's jump in here. What we're going to do is we're going to start with total assets, because what we're trying to determine are what are the assets actually employed in the business, regardless of their financing source. So the financing source comes from the liabilities section. There's actually another way to do this where you start with equity, add debt, and then remove some of the intangibles. I've actually, in thinking this through more recently, have really adopted the asset first methodology. So we're going to use that here, and I believe that's what Buffett uses. So we're going to simply start from the balance sheet. We see 120 billion, 480 million of total assets. Now, the amounts that Kraft or Heinz and the predecessors, 3G, have paid more than the identifiable assets are in the goodwill category. That's that 44 billion. So we're going to take that out. We're also going to take out the intangible assets, because those are assets that essentially do not require additional investment to continue or to grow the business. They're already there. They're already invested in the business, but they're not tangible. Buffett is looking for tangible, return on tangible capital. So that's the asset side. We are going to take a look at what are called spontaneous liabilities, and those arise in the current category just from doing business. So if they order a product, for example, some inventory, they might get that product but then pay for it 30 days later. Well, that's a source of capital essentially to the business that doesn't have to be invested. It's non-interest bearing, and it's essentially reduces the amount of capital that's required to be invested in the business. So we're going to remove about 4 billion of accounts payable. We're going to remove the accrued marketing, and then we're going to remove our other current liabilities. Now, we're also going to remove, I've just taken out all of the cash. because that's cash. If you look back in the history of the business, this amount of cash is clearly a surplus. It's not invested in the business. It's just sitting there. So it's not actually required to run this business. Now, some cash is required to run a business. And analysts use various techniques. They might use 2% of revenues, 5% of revenues in some cases. But when we take out all of the cash, we get a tangible capital employed of $6.87 billion. So if there's a tiny bit of cash that's required to run the business, that's roughly $7 billion. We don't have to get exactly precise here, but that $7 billion is the number that Buffett was referring to. Now we take a look at operating income, also known as EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes. The reason you're using EBIT is because Buffett wants to look, first of all, at the pre-tax profitability of this business. So remove any kind of tax effects, which can be managed by good managements. But let's look at the core business pre-tax. And we're also going to remove interest, because what we care about are all of the financing sources, which includes equity and debt. So just the business as if it were 100% equity financed. And that's at $6.142 billion. So when we divide that in to the tangible capital number that we've got, we see an 89% pre-tax return on tangible capital, which is an indication of an incredible business. Now, the problem, as Buffett has identified, is they didn't get to buy this business at the level of tangible capital employed. 3G and Berkshire Hathaway purchased Kraft and Heinz at a substantial premium. So as Buffett says, the return on the business is one thing, and that's, as sort of a side note, how management is evaluated in Buffett's mind is the actual tangible capital. But the investor, just like if you were to buy a stock in the stock market, the investor is paying a premium to the underlying capital. So Berkshire and 3G have to earn, in this case, on $107 billion, which is about a 6% return. And the reason they accepted that return was 3G's history of wringing out additional margin in the business. And so if that $6 billion, for example, went to $7 billion or more, and they were able to grow revenues too, that return on the purchase price would be higher and be more satisfactory. Now, Buffett, elsewhere in this interview, talks about the competition that arose that prevented 3G from essentially realizing everything that they were expecting. But it's still underlying a very, very good business. Now, it's very important as you go through this. I've given you sort of the template, but it's very important to sort of think about what you're doing, what you're removing. If a business, needs the cash, you might want to add some of that back. If there's any kind of other unique situation to the business, just think about what you're doing. Don't just plug it into the spreadsheet, but really have a meaning behind the assets or liabilities that you're deducting and so forth. And just a final point, Buffett talks about the ability to reinvest in the business. And he said, we'd love to invest another $7 billion and get another $6 billion of operating income, but they can't do it. And so the return on the 3G's investment, if Kraft Heinz can employ additional tangible capital, it can earn on that, and 3G and Berkshire do not have to put up any additional money to gain that. But Kraft Heinz is a business such that it doesn't have this large growth runway. The returns were going to be from margin, but any growth clearly would be good if it can be had at anywhere near the pre-tax returns that the business was currently employing. I'm not going to show this here, but if you look at the Kraft Heinz balance sheet going forward, you'll see that a couple of years afterwards, 2 years in a row, actually, there were a series of write-downs of the goodwill and intangible assets on the balance sheet. If you're using this framework and you're already taking out these intangible assets, you will find that the tangible capital employed has changed slightly, but it's not going to change to the degree of the write-off. And because it's a non-cash write-off, it's appropriate to add it back. So that's just sort of a little intermediate or advanced analysis tip. Please let me know in the comments. I'll just wrap this up, getting kind of long here. But if there's any questions you have, if you're wondering where I found something, how I calculated something, how Buffett thought about something, I'll do my best to try to decipher that. But thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, again, thank you for subscribing, liking, sharing this, and please let me know how I can do better. And again, thank you to Felix for your question. So until next time, stay rational.